Welcome to TFTB, Tales from the Bridge. My name is Tristan.
Hi, I'm Marty.
Hey, this is Kevin.
I'm still Sam.
And this is episode number 10, and we are talking about Becky Chambers' A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. We all love this book. It was fantastic. Stick around for some trivia, as usual, at the end. Well, let's make our way over to the bridge.
I don't know if you guys have heard about either of these. Both of these are kind of spacey, kind of ship-ish related that I thought were both pretty cool. The first one relates to DARPA. And anytime I ever hear anything that DARPA does, the Defense Advanced Research Project agency in the U.S., I always get kind of excited because it's not all about violence and killing people. Some pretty cool stuff comes out of DARPA, like, the internet and other things like that. They just recently commissioned 3 different organizations to build a new type of space rocket engine. So Blue Origin, Lockheed Martin, and General Atomics, they've hired all 3 of them to separately develop a fission thermal rocket for out in space. So typically we use chemical rockets, right? Let's burn some gases and let's shoot it out through a nozzle and let's go fast in space. But this is actual little fission explosions in the backside of a rocket. And I guess the idea is you can travel from Earth to Mars rather than like a 7-month journey in less than half of that. So it could cut down the journey to Mars, to like 3 months or something.
So just to see if I understand this right, you are riding the wake of a nuclear explosion behind you.
Many and constant.
Constant. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I've heard of this before, but I never thought anybody would be crazy enough to build it.
Yeah. So it's enough that they're willing to pay for it to be built, like an actual working prototype of it.
So here's my question. How do you get all these nuclear bombs with plutonium in them up into space? And what happens if anything goes wrong on that transport, on that journey?
Fallout all over Earth. I mean, this is why you haven't seen a lot of satellites with any type of nuclear payload since the 60s. I do believe the latest Mars probe, whichever one that went up there, the lander, I thought it had some radioactive material on it, but they've really been trying to avoid it, just for what you say, Marty. But this would be a ton of it, wouldn't it? Like, wouldn't this be a lot of radioactive material?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, if you have like you said, multiple and continuous nuclear explosions behind you, I mean, they're probably talking about hundreds of nuclear warheads or something, or thousands, who knows? That's that's a lot of fissile material to vaporize in our atmosphere, and if anything went wrong on the rocket launching it. Mm-hmm. I know Cassini, right? I think Cassini had a nuclear reactor on it, and I don't know if it was the last time that they did that, but I remember when I was reading about this issue of putting nuclear material, through launching it into space, and what goes wrong. What if it goes wrong? That they did do it. They just went for it at least once. I don't know how many. I'm sure the Russians also just did this plenty. They didn't have any worries about that kind of thing.
I have to wonder if part of the criteria, though, I mean, this is me just guessing, is that it has to be efficient. Right, like that you increase the efficiency of the combustion, so you don't actually have to bring up as much. Like if you can find a process that is really, hyper efficient in a way that can manufacture it or process it in whatever way is required, and you're not bringing up enough to be hazardous given sort of atmospheric accident on the way up. I don't know, but I mean, I would think that would be the first problem they need to tackle, right? Like this is exactly the first one that you both highlight here. I don't know. Again, total guess on my part. But.
It sounds to me like that idea that you just do once at the end of a movie, where it's like, we got to get away. Well, why don't we just blow something up and it'll make us go faster, and you just get away with it once. So it's interesting to think that they're going to do this as a way to travel for millions of kilometers in space. That's crazy.
Well, I guess if you need less material, less fuel, because it is so reactive and you don't need as much of it, you could cut down your costs by by not sending up so much heavy fuel. But at what other costs, which is the potential risk of destroying parts of the ocean or who knows what. They have been doing this for a long time because I think Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, they had either plutonium or uranium payload for energy, which is why they're still powered.
Yeah, very cool.
Also presents an interesting material science problem, like what is the back of the ship made of that is, getting hit with sort of nuclear wave explosions all the time and just like surfing on it. Like, how do you not get destroyed by that kind of propulsion system? I guess you got to launch them far enough away or something.
Or have a ton of radiation, right? So radiation for
Right.
the poor astronauts who are in there, assuming these are even going to be used with manned spacecrafts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And maybe they won't even do it. Like maybe they'll find that it's just not feasible and it's not worth bothering with because it's too high risk.
Well, I think this also touches on an interesting fundamental physics issue about fission versus fusion, right? Fission is what we've got. We figured it out a long time ago, but it's intrinsically toxic and only makes more toxic materials. Fusion is the opposite, right? You're taking small light elements and you're blasting them together to make a heavier element, but like you're making helium or lithium or something, right? Like still really, really non-toxic kind of materials as a byproduct. And that's why, like in science fiction and in video games and Sid Meier's, Civilizations, for example, like the big starship doesn't really happen until you got to figure out fusion first, right? Fusion is the power source that you kind of need, and there's no issue of toxicity and blowing up terrible materials and vaporizing them in the atmosphere when you send up a fusion engine, because it's basically going to go up with like hydrogen and helium or something like that as its fuel source. And that really skips over a whole bunch of problems. And you're not creating more toxic materials either. You're actually probably creating like useful materials that you can use along the way as your waste product. So fusion, man, it's the only way to go, I think, both for our own terrestrial energy needs and for propulsion in the future. We got to figure that stuff out.
Get on that, Marty.
Yeah. Well, it's only 20 years away.
Isn't that what they said 20 years ago?
Exactly, yeah. This is the old joke that it's only 20 years away, and it always will be. Yeah.
Or they just make launches up into space so reliable that you don't even need to worry about anything falling back.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. Another thing, it's very rare that you hear anything interesting coming out of major airlines, but United Air in the United States has signed a deal with a U.S.-based organization to build a supersonic passenger jet. So we haven't had one of those since the Concorde. British Airways stopped using that a while ago, and this new one is going to be called Boom. No, the company's name is Boom, and the aircraft is going to be called Overture, apparently. And it's going to go at 1,800 kilometers an hour, which is about 800 kilometers faster than the speed of sound, about Mach 1.7, and which is oddly still slower than the Concorde, which was originally built in 1976.
Wow.
But here's a question: would you pay for that? Does it matter to you to save a couple hours?
I wouldn't, but I'm sure there are executives who would, and I'm sure what they're aiming for, right?
Well, what was the reason that the Concorde was discontinued?
Mm-hmm.
Sounded as though it was a real maintenance nightmare. Apparently, it was not profitable for years and years and years, but in the last couple years, just before they retired it, it was profitable. I don't know if that takes into account all the maintenance issues they had, but I'd heard that it was because they were just fairly long in the tooth.
I think it'd be fun just to do once to cross the sound barrier and to say that you've done it. Like that would be the draw for me. But if I was flying regularly, I wouldn't. It couldn't be prohibitively expensive for me to use it in any kind of regular fashion. But
how fast does a regular jet go? Is it like
900 kilometers an hour?
So it's about double the speed that you'd be
Yeah.
getting with this new one. Yeah, so half the time. I imagine there's a fair number of executives out there that, like, if you're flying, well, it depends how far they can fly too, right? Like, this is the thing, it's kind of diminishing returns. If you can cut your travel time to Australia in half or to China, I think lots of people would pay for that. But I doubt one of these supersonic planes can make that kind of journey in one shot. So
Well, it also
saving an hour or two off of shorter flights, presumably.
it would also reduce your changeovers too, right? Because when you're flying, all the planes are basically the same, and when you're going to Australia, you're from this part of the world, you're not necessarily going straight there. You're probably making a stop, depending on what you pay. But I doubt with this overture, you're getting on one overture and then getting on another one. You're probably pretty direct, and that is going to be convenient for a lot of the people that are going places in the world that don't have a direct line from where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could skip the misery of LAX, O'Hare, and Frankfurt. That would be worth a lot of money to people, right? Like, and to people who could expense it to a big corporate account.
Yeah,
at least.
Yeah. I've stopped in two of those places you just mentioned. So, mind you, I was in no hurry.
Well, the other thing about these supersonic jets is they can't get supersonic unless they're over water, because most countries have got laws against these jets having sonic booms over populated areas. So they're limited to kind of cross ocean journeys.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess that's interesting, because you'd think New York to LA would be the obvious thing that, I'm sure they could make money off of that run. There's so many people doing that all the time. If you could cut that in half, it'd be great. But yeah, I guess you couldn't do it.
No, British Airways, their bread and butter was London to New York.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So we had a little side project last month where we looked at some award-winning or award-nominated books, and Marty kind of got that going. So we all picked our own books. I had Rebecca Roanhorse's Black Sun, which I loved. What did you guys have, and did you like it?
I had N.K. Jemison's The City We Became. So these, we picked the four. There happened to be four novels that were both nominated for Hugo and the Nebula this year, and so we each picked one. And I have loved everything that I've read by N.K. Jemisin to date. And we actually, Kevin, on our first episode, he picked a short story by N.K. Jemisin as his favorite thing that he read all year, which was The City. The City is, it's a similar title. The City Born Great. That's what it was. Yeah. And we all read that, and I certainly loved that too. And so The City We Became is a novelization that sort of springs from that short story. And I was super excited about it. And N.K. Jemison's been winning all the awards, and I'm amazed by her as a writer in general. But with this one, I was quite sadly disappointed. It just didn't hit the mark for me. I like the story better. I think the story sort of did everything that was best in the book, and the book sort of. I've talked to some other people as well who love her work and were disappointed by this. They said it could have used a better editor. I'm not so aware of all of that, but yeah, it was a story that fell a little flat for me and a little repetitive, and it just didn't quite have the lyrical magic that I love of all her other writing. She's she combines fantasy and sci-fi in this intense way where you're sort of in a science fiction world maybe, but she describes these the ways of doing magic, not magic, but having power, and how this might work out in the world and how it would feel. And so I love all that about her writing, and she sort of started doing that about what it would be like to be a city, so a person who's an avatar to a city and can feel the city doing different things. And I don't know, it just didn't it started great and didn't quite hit the target. So anyway, I then went and listened to Black Sun, and I friggin' loved it. It was one of the best books I've heard, listened to, read in a while. Maybe it was just where I was at, but I got to agree with Tristan. Black Sun was amazing by Rebecca Roanhorse, and
which is not science fiction, we should add.
Yeah,
but
definitely more fantasy.
Yeah, but I'm definitely glad to have been introduced to that, because I wouldn't have read that if you hadn't have brought this little side project to us. So it's great, highly recommended.
I read or I started to read, I should say, Piranesi by Susanna Clark. And I'm a fan of the Susanna Clark. I was a big fan of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And so I quickly rose my hand for this book. And I just didn't connect with it. It could be that because I was trying it on as an Audible book for the first time, and or as my first Audible book, and it could just be that the narrator. But it's clearly wonderful literature that was just wasted on me, and I can see where other people could really enjoy it, and but I got a couple chapters in, and I couldn't even get past that stage of building a story. When you sometimes the first like 2 or 3 chapters are a bit rough, but they're essential to making the rest of the story really good. And maybe that's what happens, and I just wasn't patient enough. But I haven't picked it up since. I think I'm on chapter 3, and I just kind of couldn't do it. And again, there could be a couple of factors there. Susanna Clark's an author that I root for, but this novel felt like a kind of an episode of The Twilight Zone. Like I almost want, like I could just almost picture that voice. Like picture a man trapped in a house. But anyway, so it wasn't for me, but I could definitely see where it would be something enjoyable for just better people than me. And so I did enjoy it, but
I'm enjoying that book, Sam.
So yeah, I really do feel guilty about like not getting anywhere with this, but I just couldn't do it. I just and we're swimming in amazing stuff to read right now, so it's hard to stick with something that doesn't grab me.
So as I said last time, I was reading Network Effects by Martha Wells, and I think at that time I had already read it in our last episode. And I've read all of the Murderbot Diaries novellas, and they're all great. They're excellent. The Network Effects was more of the same. It was just a little bit longer. And I read through it quickly, and I said, "Oh, this is awesome!" And she has another one coming out this year, and I'm going to read that one too. And as I was reading it, I thought, there is no way this is going to win the Nebula. It's just, it's repetitive in the series. It's not boring. It's good. It's well written, but I didn't think it was well written enough to win the Nebula. And Marty was thoughtful enough to host a Nebula Awards party in his back deck the other night, and we went and we watched, and sure enough, Network Effects won the Nebula for best novel, and so of course made me incorrect. But anyway, I think that it was not. It was probably well deserved. What the heck do I know?
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. You've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune in to 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
Well, let's get into the book. I think we all enjoyed. Actually, I haven't heard Kevin say anything, so I think he hated this book.
I liked it. I thought it was great. Yeah,
Okay.
It was really good.
The day Kevin hates a book is the day that civilization will collapse.
Not too many that I've gotten all the way through that I hate, I have to say.
I feel similar, very similar to Kevin in that, right? I usually do not hate a book. I think there's only one book I can think of this year that I didn't really enjoy. It was kind of boring, but everything else, I'm good. I'm good. If you wrote it, I'll read it.
So last month we read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers on my recommendation. This is part of a trilogy Actually, I think there's 4 volumes now of sort of independent stories in the same universe, but not necessarily connected, although some of the characters overlap. This book has a really interesting history of having been self-published and then nominated for major awards and then being picked up by a big publisher, and then the whole series ended up winning the Hugo for the for best series a few books in, and it's gotten great reviews, and it's I think from having talked to you guys about your impressions, everybody enjoyed the book. I can't wait to hear what you guys thought and what you liked and what you didn't. I think Sam also went on and read a whole bunch more work by Becky Chambers. I also read one of her novellas, To Be Taught If Fortunate, which was quite a lovely little thing outside of the series of the series. And I've read also Closed in Common Orbit, which is the second book after The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which was also very lovely. It overlaps with just a couple of the characters from the first book. So, yeah, I think I said plenty about it in our last episode introducing it, and I'd love to hear what you guys thought. Why don't we start with Kevin on the spot?
All right. Well, I tell you, you said in your intro last time it was all about the characters, and it certainly was. I mean, this is a nice book because it's easy to connect with. You have these extremely well developed, very round characters. Every single one of them is different. It's almost as though Becky was trying to create a smorgasbord of heterogeneous societies of people that all work together, and it was one view of utopia that I thought was really cool. All these different societies that are accepting of each other. The humans that have left Sol, the Sol system, are all pacifists. It's this view that we're accepting of different people and love between different species. In most cases, but there's still enough of bias that it makes it exciting for the reader. The Captain Ashby and his illicit affair with his Andrisk girlfriend. The AI love between Lovey and Jenks, right? I mean, here we have a short human and an AI who are in love. Pepper, this other engineer, and she comes up from this special world where they're extremely intolerant of differences, and it's painted with this very negative brush. So I thought it was a great way to explore different types of relationships, and we could be accepting of them. And to me, that's what the book was about, was different types of relationships and getting right into characters. And along with that, I thought was great science fiction writing, this tunneling through space, creating the portals between parts of the universe. That's great sci-fi. So she, you talk about all the different, having lots of different check boxes. She checked off a lot of check boxes that made a very good sci-fi story also very accessible.
Yeah, they definitely, I really enjoyed this book and the book that followed. I was really happy with the world that she created, and I just didn't want to leave it. So I just, as soon as I finished reading it, I actually just picked up the second one. And there, radical diversity and inclusiveness and cultural relativism were all key themes that I sort of pulled away from this as well. It's kind of like sci-fi for hippies, like you're going to be, everyone's pretty aligned, or fairly aligned on trying to find a way to work together and get along. And even when the stakes do sort of get raised and this sort of imperfect universe is painted, I never felt that there was any threat to any of the characters. Now it's not entirely true, but I don't want to spoil the end of the book for anyone, but it's by the sort of second interaction, I think, when the pirates show up, and you get a sense that, they can negotiate, and you also get the pirates' perspective, who, they're trying to, with the poverty that they're coming from, and what sort of spurred them into the actions that they're taking, so that you kind of see both sides to an issue. There's a lot of gray areas. They're not just like these, black hat desperados who show up and rob the place. They can be negotiated with, and you get an understanding that they've got kids to feed and that sort of thing. So there's these elements of understanding and sort of cultural exchange, and I really enjoyed it. It sometimes felt a little hopeful, and but I was in the right place for it. You know, like I was game for it, and I really this turned out to be probably one of my. I put this book in my top 5, maybe top 3 of the books that we've read since we've come together as a club. So yeah, I highly recommend. And I've got the third one from you, Marty. So that's next on my reading list. So
Okay, you're right. Yeah, I haven't read that one yet either, but I'm certainly looking forward to it.
This book was full of some of the most likable characters of any book I've read in a while. And it happened so quickly too. Even though at first you're not sure about Rosemary, you're not sure if she's good and if she's up to something. Soon enough, you find out that she is good and she's trying to get away from something. And the relationships, it's a book about relationships. The story's not very big. And it really reminded me of that classic, and I know it's so easy to refer back to Lord of the Rings, but that whole fellowship adventure quest, they weren't really on a huge quest. They just had a meeting point, and they had to create a hole through space. So there wasn't a huge quest, but they stopped at all these planets to get food and just to have time off the ship. They met so many. The world building happened whenever they stopped at these planets, and they met so many characters that the world was built on visiting these planets and a little bit of the conversation on the ship itself. But the world was really built on those planets, and the characters that they visited or that they ran into on these other planets on their journey really felt like that classic fantasy, just like moving along, trying to get to one destination, and who we meet along the way will have good conversation. But overall, I've never read a science fiction book that had so many likable characters, and I was rooting for every single one of them. Even the guy I didn't like at the beginning, Corbin. I thought, okay, so he's going to be trouble by the end. And of course, by the end, you really empathize with him.
Yeah.
And he's likable. And I did, honestly, I thought that he was going to screw everything up by the end, and maybe he was going to be the problem, because there wasn't one direct problem throughout the story. And I empathized with him and liked him by the end. So there's very few, even the pirates, like you're saying, I empathize with them.
You know, I gotta say, I loved what she did just while we were talking about the subplots. I love the story of Corbin, how she wrapped that up. She sort of starts the book setting up Corbin as like the grouchy old man that's the problem, you know, on the crew that people don't get along with, and Sissix especially doesn't getting along with him. And so you sort of know that, okay, this character is being set up for something in the future. And she really surprised me. I think that's where she kind of started winning my heart, is with that.
For sure.
It's not what you expected, right? You expected conflict, you expected this guy to do something bad, piss someone off, but then it turned out, and I don't want to give away too much, but you know, he has a surprising sudden hardship, and it turns out that, you know, the person that had to save him was Sissix, who had the hardest and worst relationship with him. And I just love how, I mean, it was just so emblematic, I think, of the point of her stories and her writing, is that the two characters with the most conflict, you know, one of those had to help the other, and she did so happily, right? There was no real, it was clear and absolutely known that, well, of course, I'll do whatever I need. I don't like this guy. He pisses me off all the time, but this is what needs to be done, and I'll step up. And it's a message about family, right? It's family that we're really talking about. It's not just that they're friends. The difference is that they're family, and you don't always like your family, and they piss you off, and you don't get along. There's personality conflicts, but at the end of the day, you know, you do whatever you need to do because you ultimately love this person, even if they aren't your favorite person.
And with Sizzix, that was literally true because as an Andrisk, she adopted the crew of the Wayfarers as her family, right? And that was that she wrote that in literally to build the relationships amongst that crew, which I thought was really neat.
Yeah.
My biggest problem is that in this idealized future, everyone's got to eat giant bugs, and so that's what makes me fear the future.
I actually really appreciated that just intellectually. It was like when she put that in and naturalized it so much. It actually was a light bulb for me to be like, oh, bong. Of course, in the future, everybody's going to be eating insects. It's way higher efficiency, conversion of protein from resources, and they're lighter and easier to transport. And you're not going to have a pig on a ship. You're going to have bugs. You're going to have crickets, and you're going to, and the bigger the bug, the better. Hey, why not? But it's still not going to. Like you can't raise livestock. Where are we going to get our meat? Where are we going to protein? Yeah, insects actually make a lot of sense for space travel.
And Dr. Chef says, I think at one point, is it true that you eat mammals on Mars? That's barbaric.
Yeah.
No. Well, it's a great book.
Good.
Yeah, full of great ideas. Yeah, great for sure. It was just neat to like every character so much. It was like going on an adventure with them and not feeling too much resistance and too much evil. It was, I think you were looking for an optimistic sci-fi, Marty. You said this maybe a year ago or so.
Yeah.
And this is perfect. This is optimistic sci-fi, so it's a fun read for anyone who wants that feel good sci-fi read.
I agree. Yeah, I guess the overarching theme, certainly of this book, maybe all her books, is inclusivity. And it's interesting. She, the language is very progressive. There's a certain species that's a symbiote between a sort of macroscopic creature and, I guess, is it a fungus or a bacteria or anyway some sort of microscopic creature that infects its brain, and so they are a they, and it's not a gender neutral they, it's an actual they. They're plural, and I think, is there some other other pronouns are used certainly in the second book. I think I don't remember if in the first, and it's just very sort of inclusive. It's this view of the future that everybody's trying to just be better and be good and be accepting and be inclusive. And boy, I mean, it's sort of surprising that it hasn't this theme. I mean, it's the theme of our time right now, so it's not surprising that now is the time that these kinds of books are coming out. But when I think about it, I mean, radical inclusivity isn't really a theme that I would have picked out of most of the science fiction I've read. And yet, when you think about it, well, if science fiction is about going forth into the universe and meeting more kinds of intelligent creatures and more cultures and more aliens and more, right? Then you'd think actually that's a really central theme. Radical inclusivity should be a major theme of science fiction because that's kind of what the future's about. Is increasing diversity and increasing, being able to work together and love each other. And I thought it was really a timely book for today too.
And I like that. I think radical inclusivity really is the overall theme. I couldn't put it as concisely as that, but I think that is it. But there were a lot of sub themes as well, like this idea that Sam, you were talking about before of AI rights. But then also you were talking about the Cynet pair, Ohan, the navigator, and the semi-symbiotic relationship with the bacteria in his brain. But wasn't it actually controlling them and making them live in a certain way? And when you got rid of that, they were able to separate and live autonomous lives. Mm-hmm. So there's this value-laden idea that that's a better way to live. But is it actually better? So she creates really neat little sub themes that explore some of these ideas.
Yeah. There's some good gray space there that she.
Mm-hmm.
So the sequel is called A Closed and Common Orbit, and the third book is called Record of a Spaceborne Few. So all of them seem to be great, very well received books, highly recommended, and I'm glad everybody enjoyed this one.
I can highly recommend the second one.
Yeah,
I have that.
That's great.
I found that at a Mennonite thrift store.
Huh.
No joke.
That's random.
Yeah.
Okay, so should we do it?
Yeah, Kevin,
Yeah.
it's your.
Kevin, what are we
it's your-
reading next month?
Yeah, what do we
Well.
got? What do we got here?
I'm really excited about this book. I have to admit, I've actually just read it. I may actually read it again. This is if you liked The Martian, the blockbuster book that was made into a fairly popular movie by Andy Weir. You're gonna love this story. Andy Weir has just come out with a new book called Project Hail Mary. I think I mentioned it in our last episode. And I read through it. I got through it in absolutely no time flat. I'm not going to talk too much about it, apart from saying if you liked the approach that he took with The Martian, you're going to love this because it's, I would say, what he did with The Martian times two. And he wrote it in such a way that if you're into science, if you're into figuring out problems, if you actually want to learn some stuff without having to try to wrap your head around problems that are too complex, and it's presented in an accessible way, he's done a great job of basically doing that in this book. He also doesn't have as many potty words. So if anybody's reading a book to kids or what have you, this book is fairly clean. So individual who is very good at all sorts of different disciplines having to surmount adversity out in space. So that's the book, Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir.
We're going to the movies. So
Okay.
you know, I did Star Trek, I think last episode, so I felt it only fair to go to the superior movie franchise.
Oh my God, I can't believe you just said that.
Of Star Wars.
Well, we did agree when we talked about this that the movie franchise was certainly superior to Star Wars.
Yeah, one's a big screen franchise, one's a small screen franchise. In this podcast host's humble opinion, but so we're going to focus on Wedge Antilles. So as we should.
Wow.
Whenever we talk Star Wars, Wedge needs to come up now and again. So the question for today is, name the two squadrons that Wedge Antilles was a member of in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and name which one, if you're able to, which one he led.
Blue.
Red.
Black.
We got a red. So yes. So Kevin, yes, you have successfully named one of the two squadrons.
Nice.
So he was red
And
leader.
yes, and that's the one he led. So we got one red leader. In which movie was he red leader?
Empire Strikes Back.
Incorrect.
Dang.
Return of the Jedi.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
there was only two choices there. So, but we'll give you the non-money prize for that, anyways.
Wait, was Wedge not in A New Hope?
Yeah, I'm sure he was. I just yes, he was, in fact, but
He wasn't a leader yet.
but we're talking about squadrons here. So
right.
If does anyone want to make an attempt on the squadron which was newly formed for The Empire Strikes Back?
Oh boy, that's good.
Green.
Not a color. Not a
Yeah,
color.
I don't think.
I had good luck with that last time.
Rebel. Rebel Squad.
Now would this would have been on Hoth, I believe, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So this was when they're fighting the ATTs.
Yeah. So
ATTs.
the AT-ATs. Yes. So he was Rogue 3 in The Empire Strikes Back of the newly formed Rogue Squadron. So Rogue Squadron was formed for The Empire Strikes Back, and he was a member of that under call sign Rogue 3, and it's his speeder that makes the first successful hit with Wes Jansen as his harpoon gunner. And
oh wow!
So that's the so he's the fires the opening victory shot. Well, and they didn't win that fight, but anyway. So
Was that the tie around the legs of the
yes, yeah. And then he appears again towards the end of the Return of the Jedi as leader of Red Squadron at the Battle of Endor.
Yeah.
So that was I thought I'd go with like a sort of tough Star Wars question, and then I've got two easier ones that I've stolen from BuzzFeed because I didn't expect anyone to really get that one, but someone
that's
out
a good
there
one.
has.
I like that, Sam.
Yeah, that
That's
was good.
I like it's. I mean, if you can have a trivia question with Wedge in it. I mean, if you had a trivia question with Biggs, now we're talking. But Wedge, I mean, that's good. That's good.
He's just cool, and when you get into the Star Wars novels, his storyline is always kind of the most interesting one that I tend to follow. So,
nice.
Phantom Squadron comes from it's him, and then there's an offshoot with Alphabet Squadron, and it's sort of again fun beach reading, and I can recommend it for that. So BuzzFeed had a couple fun ones, and and they're quick, so I'll give them to you now, and then I'll wrap the Star Wars trivia for you. What did Luke Skywalker lose in his fight with Darth Vader?
His hand.
Which hand?
Ooh. Was it
right? It was his right.
Correct.
Really?
Correct. It was his right hand.
It's
And
his fighting hand, was it?
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a lefty, so for me, it's
Yeah, it was his right.
my right hand's disposable. It just pulls things down so I can write. And finally, who killed Jabba the Hutt?
Oh, it's Princess Leia.
There you go. Okay, so you guys got 2 out of 3.
Kills him good.
Yeah. It's good
No
retribution.
Jabba,
really.
no Wanga.
All right, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, highly recommended. Next, we are reading Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary, another fantastic book. Check that one out. It'll be out in the next few weeks. Also, we talked to Carl Schrader. That episode will be uploaded in the next few weeks, so look for that. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Until next time.